Welcome back. This is Jonathan Hill. I haven't made a video in a long time. I'm kind of getting away from that. Uh, but I have cocked up here a video that I watched earlier today. This guy Jeem follows me on Twitter, and apparently he's mentioned me a few times in his videos over the past, I don't know, 6 to 12 months or something. But I've never really cared until now. This video is just so absurd that I thought I would respond and kind of set the record straight, both on what the Holy Saints are saying, the Holy Fathers are saying, but also what I am saying. So I think what we should do first is just listen to the minute or two or so of what he has to say, and then I'll go through those points one by one, and we'll just see if he's correct or not. Let's start the video.
A Latinizer, forget Patriarch Prime, we're not dealing with memes, but in terms of actual deep theology and scholarly look, and maybe people you might see on YouTube, Jonathan Hill would be, I guess, the ideal Latinizer to mention here. And then David Erhan would be the ideal rigorist, because I'm sure most of you know who both those two people are. David Erhan has the Real Med White YouTube channel, and he's essentially a rigorist. You won't call him, I'm not sure if he'd say that, but to compare him to a Latinizer, he would be a rigorist compared to a Latinizer. Doesn't mean he's like an extreme crazy person, but that is just the theology and the tradition he holds to. The Latinizer, Jonathan Hill, in this case, if you guys don't know who Jonathan Hill is kind of a Twitter scholar. I don't know if he does YouTube. He's been a rival of Jay Dyer for some time, and he basically says, we don't believe that humanity is one universal nature, so he's denying the heavy Greek language of it being a universal, one universal. He believes in universals, but not to the extent that a lot of Greek theology gets into. He denies the strict monarchianism that people like Dyer and even myself hold, and then he holds to Augustinian original sin and a lot of Latin theology. So there's an example of a Latinizer versus...
Okay, so three main points, right? But before I get into those main points, for this label of Latinizer, I don't know. I don't even know what that means. I don't remember the last time I quoted a Latin saint. I think it was probably 2018 in my blog. There are some fantastic Latin saints: Cesarius of Arles, Peter Chrysologus, Chromatius of Aquileia, Hilary Poitiers, Hilary of Tours. Really, really great saints that we should be reading. But I think that this label Latinizer, I mean, who do you see me? When people who follow me on Twitter, people who follow my videos, who do I quote the most? Dionysius, Maximus, John Damascus, Palamas. Are those Latins? I don't even remember the last time I quoted Augustine. I asked this question a few weeks ago on Twitter. Where do I quote Augustine? I would love to find out. But now let's go back and look at his 3 points, right? One is that I deny universal human nature. We're going to see what the saints have to say about that. And we're going to see what I actually say about that, because he's just, out to lunch. 2, talking about the monarchy of the Father, a strict monarchy of the Father. I don't know what that means. We're going to talk about the monarchy of the Father. We're going to talk about where people like Dr. Bo Branson, and I think he goes incorrectly, and, a little bit too far in one direction. We're going to look at that. And then third, this idea that I'm somehow following St. Augustine, who, I'm going to be honest, I have not read. I don't care to read St. Augustine. I don't quote, again, show me where I quote him. Show me where I use him to support what I'm saying. You'd be hard pressed, because it doesn't exist. So let's go back, and we'll just go point by point, and we'll look through some citations, and we'll have a good time.
A Latinizer, forget Patriarch Prime, we're not dealing with memes, but in terms of actual deep theology and scholarly look, and maybe people you might see on YouTube, Jonathan Hill would be, I guess, the ideal Latinizer to mention here. And then David Erhan would be the ideal rigorist, because I'm sure most of you know who both those two people are. David Erhan has the Real Med White YouTube channel, and he's essentially a rigorist. You won't call him, I'm not sure if he'd say that, but...
Actually, there's another point I want to bring up here. which is rigorism. What does that even mean, right? So it gets used for people like Father Peter Hears, who say that everyone has to be baptized, and now apparently it's being used for people who don't listen to the Latin saints. I just don't get. I don't. These terms they're just meaningless, right? Anyone who also knows me knows that I think that everyone should be baptized in the Orthodox Church. That Roman Catholic clerics should not be vested. I do not like that practice. But nonetheless, that is the actual practice of Moscow, right? So okay, cookies, right? But it's obvious this guy has no idea what he is talking about, especially regarding me, right? He's just talking out of it, out of his rear. I don't get where he's getting any of these ideas. But let's move on.
To compare him to a Latinizer, he would be a rigorist compared to a Latinizer. Doesn't mean he's like an extreme crazy person, but that is just the theology and the tradition he holds to. The Latinizer, Jonathan Hill, in this case, if you guys don't know who Jonathan Hill is kind of a Twitter scholar. I don't know if he does YouTube. He's been a rival of Jay Dyer for some time, and he.
I just want to say here, just for the record, that Jay and I did make amends a few months ago. We have agreed not to talk about each other. I'm appreciative that he's so far not talked about me. I don't talk about him. I don't care. We both have just moved on. Just let's just drama.
He basically says we don't believe that humanity is one universal nature, so he's denying the heavy Greek language of it being a universal one.
Okay, so let's talk about this accusation that I supposedly deny universal nature. Okay, let's look at what some of our saints have to say. So Saint John of Damascus, right? Greek, obviously a Greek father. Yeah, he's in Syria. I don't think we'd call him a Syriac father. I mean, he wrote in Greek. He's a Greek father compared to a Western Latin father, right? Let's read what he has to say. The nature may be taken either purely theoretically, since it is not self subsistent, or it may be taken as what is common to persons of the same species and connects them, in which case it is said to be a nature taken specifically, or the same with accidents added may be considered wholly in one person, in which case it is said to be a nature taken individually, which is the same as to be taken specifically. Now, when God the Word became incarnate, he did not assume human nature as taken in a purely theoretical sense. This would be the so-called universal, right? We're going to see what St. Photius has to say about this in a second. For that would be to have no real incarnation, but a fraudulent and fictitious one. Nor did he assume it as taken specifically, right? So he didn't take the entire specific nature, right? But he did because he did not assume all persons, right? So if he takes the nature specifically, then he would be the entire species, which he is not the entire species. He is one man, right? He is a member of the species. But he did assume it taken individually, which is the same as to be taken specifically, right? He's talking about how we as individual members of the species take the human nature. Okay. Now, this is what Jeem does not understand is that there's a difference between numerically one and specifically one, right? And I've talked about this a lot. Okay. So we contrast the numerically one divine nature between the specifically one human nature, right? So there's numerically one divine nature, which is why there is one God. There is specifically one nature, which is why there are many persons, right? We don't say that the nature of the Trinity is specific because the persons of the Trinity are not a species, right? There's not a genus or a species there. But we do say that the human nature is specifically one because we are a species, right? And so the nature that we take is individual. I am a nature plus properties. You are a different nature plus properties because you are a different person. We are the same specific nature, that is, we are both human, but in terms of the nature that we have, it is individual, right? This is what St. John of Damascus says. He says he assumes the nature individually, okay? So this is not a denial that there's one human nature, right? This is not some kind of idea that I don't know where Jeem's getting, but it's been very clear that he has both not read what the Greek fathers say. He has no idea what they're talking about, and he himself just does not understand the topic whatsoever. Okay, because there is a difference between specifically one and numerically one. We do not have numerically one human nature because that would mean that there's only one person, as in there's numerically one divine nature, there's one God, right? You see the analogy there? You see how that works? Nor did Jesus assume the entire species. He didn't assume the whole nature specifically, right? Because then he would be the whole species. That would be to assume all persons. Okay. Let's move on. Again, on the same topic. This is St. Photius. I've used this before to talk about how hypostasis is nature plus properties. But very clearly, we see him in the second paragraph of this meme here. When did Christ, what then did Christ assume? One will ask if he assumed neither the universal man nor the particular man. Okay, so he didn't assume the universal nature because that would be to assume what? What? Let's go back. That would be to assume what? The species, assume all the persons, assuming all of the persons. That's clearly not what's going on, right? So again, Jeem just totally out to lunch, has no idea what he's talking about. Let's move on.
Universal. He believes in universals, but not to the extent that a lot of Greek theology gets into. He denies the strict monarchianism that people like Dyer and even myself hold. And then,
okay, so point two, I supposedly deny a strict monarchianism. I don't know what that means, right? I love when in these debates or someone's trying to explain what somebody else says, they say, well, we're not strict monotheists. We're not strict this. We're not strict that. I don't know what strict monarchy of the Father is. There's the monarchy of the Father, and that is that the Father is the sole hypostatic source of the Son and the Spirit. Done. Done. That is the entire theology. It's done. There's nothing more to say about it. Right? Now, where we have problems, and I'm going to cock this up, I've talked about this before, right? So here we have an issue that I've taken up with Dr. Bo Branson, where he talks about how the Father is the one source or first principle, not of creation. Okay? Now, what's the problem with this? The problem with saying that the Father is the one source of creation at the negation of the Son and the Spirit is that you then relegate the Son and the Spirit to a secondary cause or secondary principle, okay? Which is, ta-da, textbook Arianism, okay? Rather, what the saints say, such as St. Maximus in Ambiguo 1 and St. Gregory the Theologian in an oration I cannot remember at the moment, is that the Trinity is the monarch of creation, okay? Actually, let me bring this up because I have it right here. So, here we have I'm just going to screenshot it and post it on Twitter in 2 seconds. So that we can all look at it. Okay, so here we have St. Maximus's Ambigua 1, the very first one, number 2. 1-2, right? If, while considering the apparent contradiction of a servant of God, you were to regard, let me scroll this over, get a little better window. Okay, so we can just see this a little better. If, while considering the apparent contradiction of a servant of God, you were at loss regarding the real agreement, it would nevertheless not be possible for two statements to be more unified in meaning than these. He's talking about something that St. Gregory has said. For the phrase, here it is, the dyad was surpassed, it means the same thing as not coming to a halt in the dyad, just as the phrase the Trinity was defined means the same thing as the movement of the monad comes to a halt in the Trinity. This is the important part. For we believe in a monarchy that is neither begrudging of its bounty in the sense of being restricted to a single person, nor disorderly in the sense of being poured out ad infinitum, right? So the monarchy vis-a-vis creation is not just the Father. We cannot say that the Father is the one source of creation at the negation of the Son and the Spirit. Rather, the monarchy of creation is the Trinity, right? Because the Son and the Spirit are not secondary causes, okay? This is a huge problem in something like what Bo Branson is talking about and what these other people are trying to say. Huge, huge problem, right? There's another issue, which is they have a very strange idea that because we say that there's one God, because there's one Father, therefore the Father is the one true God. This makes absolutely no sense. Okay, and I'm going to explain why this makes no sense. Because not only do we say that there's one God because there's one Father, which is true, but we also say that there's one God because there's one divinity, right? I have it clocked up here from St. Maximus. Let me just adjust this window here for a minute so we can better read it. Okay, so it's true. Number 4, there is one God because there's one Father. Absolutely true. But number 5, there is one God because there is one divinity. Okay? Now, if we say that because there's one God, because there's one Father, therefore there's one God, therefore the Father is the one God, they would have to say that because we say there's one divinity, there's one God, therefore the divinity is the one true God, at the negation of the persons. Right? Do you understand that the problem here? They're misunderstanding the reason why there's one God with what is the one God. Those are two different questions, right? So if they were at least consistent and coherent, they would have to say, well, we say there's one God because there's one divinity, therefore the divinity is the one true God. But they don't say that, right? And what makes this even worse is in Not Three Gods, St. Gregory points out that there is one God because there's one energy. Right? So using their logic, using their own system, they would therefore have to say the one divine energy is the one true God at the negation of both the divinity and the three persons. Would they ever say that? Right? Again, they are confusing. What these people confuse, Branson, Jeem, all these people, what they are confusing is the reason why there's one true God and what the one true God is. They are not the same thing. Okay? Let's move on.
He holds to Augustinian original sin and a lot of Latin theology.
Okay, so the final point. I supposedly hold to Augustinian original sin and Latin theology. Okay, so for anyone who has known me, I wrote this article 7 years ago now, 2017. Okay, I invite everyone to read this article. I deny penal substitutionary atonement. I put satisfaction on its head. I quote St. Dionysius the Areopagite. There isn't a single Latin saint quoted in this article. It's actually just the divine names. Oh, here's St. Mark. St. Mark the Ascetic. Is he a Latin? Very interesting, right? Oh, I do actually quote St. Augustine. I stand corrected. But in order to refute PSA, look at this. Amazing. Amazing. Again, I did this in July of 2017. Okay. And I have this clocked up. I absolutely will never say what happens to babies, ever. I've never said that. My point regarding the judgment of the unbaptized is we don't know. There's only one person that is God, right? You can say the Trinity, who knows and who judges where the unbaptized go, right? So if you were to say, well, the unbaptized go to heaven, that is a judgment that we are not allowed to make, right? And regarding this idea of Augustinian original sin and this whole blow up with His Grace Bishop Irenae, let me just say this. There's a lot of confusion about what is actually going on. Okay, so somebody like His Grace Bishop Irenae is saying that we were fashioned like Adam in the garden, and we're not guilty. Okay, because God doesn't punish the innocent for somebody else's sins. This actually doesn't jive with reality. Okay, so when Adam was punished in the garden, he suffered two deaths. The first spiritual, and the second was physical. And the second happens because of the first, right? So the soul animates the flesh, and because the noose is darkened and no longer animates the soul is dead. That is the first death, his first spiritual death. And then because the soul is dead, it no longer can animate the flesh, and eventually the flesh will die. Fine. Okay? The thing is, we are all born into that state. We are all born into a state where our noose is darkened and our soul is dead. This is why we have to be reborn through baptism, right? This is the entire point of baptism and being reborn. That's why that language is used, right? The other thing is there are other punishments that go along with Adam's original sin. We have to toil the earth. We have to deal with thorns. Women have pain in childbearing. Guess what we all have? We all bear those punishments, even though I didn't do what Adam did. I'm born into a state where I have to work. I suffer. My wife will have pain in childbearing. Your wives will have pain in childbearing. That's a punishment given to Eve for what Eve did, but you nonetheless are bearing that punishment. So this idea that God doesn't punish people for the sins of others and that's innocent, that doesn't jive with reality, right? And this is what we mean when we say original guilt or we talk about being guilty for what Adam did. This is what we're talking about. I'm guilty. I suffer. We all suffer, and we're born into the state whether we chose to or not. We're born spiritually dead. We're born having to work the fields. We're born suffering through the thorns. And women are born knowing that they will bear pain in childbearing, among other things, right? So this idea that you're born innocent, this whole idea that you have to be this like immaculate conception of the entire human race, it's just nonsense. It's just nonsense, and it needs to go away. And I don't know what is going on with these people, you know, but it needs to go away. Anyway, that's a side tangent. This guy this guy right here, really, I don't know what his deal is. But he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's bringing me up and saying a whole bunch of stupid, idiotic things, claiming I'm thinking this and thinking that. And I'd rather he just go away. I mean, I'm tired of just having to listen to people talk about things and claim all these stupid things that I've said when they don't know what the topic, they don't know the subject, they clearly haven't read the Holy Fathers, they clearly don't know what they're talking about. So that guy can just shut up. I'm over it. All right. Bam! We're out. God bless.